Hey, what's going on, everybody? Dr. Zach Long, Doctor of Physical Therapy, lead faculty for the Institute of Clinical Management's Fitness Athlete Division. Excited to talk to everybody today about what I consider to be the 5 best squat fixes. What are the 5 movements that I go to the most when athletes come to me and their squat just doesn't look like what I want it to look at? Before we dive into those, I want to remind you that the ICE just put out a free ebook resource for anybody performing cervical manipulations or looking at adding cervical manipulations to their repertoire of skills long term. And that's a book that goes over the safety of cervical spine manipulation. If you want to download that, you can go to bit.ly/cervical safety. All right, so that's getting to the best squat fixes. Number 1, my go-to almost always is going to be a goblet squat, where we have an athlete hold a kettlebell, hold a dumbbell, hold a weight plate out in front of their chest. What that's going to do a lot of times is counterbalance somebody's weight. And so for a lot of athletes that have a difficulty finding their anterior posterior balance and have a difficulty sitting back into their squat, having that weight out in front will make it easier for them to understand how to push their hips back. Now, the goblet squat does a lot more than that as well. And so I'll also use it on the other side of the equation. If I have an athlete that's actually sitting too far back in their squat, and maybe that's making their torso lean super far forward, and they're a CrossFitter or Olympic lifter needing to do overhead squats, and so a more upright torso is advantageous for you. If you're working with fitness athletes and don't understand what I'm talking about there, then you definitely need to look at the fitness athlete courses. But if somebody's not accessing their dorsiflexion or just doesn't have good dorsiflexion mobility, I can also use the goblet squat to help out with that. So what I'll have an athlete do in that case is they use a goblet squat, squat down, and then we'll rest their forearms right in their knees. And so they've got this weight right on top of their knees, and we use that weight to actually pull their knees forward to drive them into a little bit of loaded dorsiflexion. So that can be both great as a stretch, or it can be a great follow-up to the mobility work that we do in the clinic. If I'm doing some talocrural mobilizations, if I'm doing some soft tissue work on the gastroc soleus complex, then I can follow it up with that version of the goblet squat to try to really get them then accessing that dorsiflexion in the functional movement patterns that we want them to use that dorsiflexion with. One of the final ways that I'll use a goblet squat is for thoracic spine mobility. So we'll squat down, get in the bottom of the squat, and then take a lighter kettlebell and actually press our arms into shoulder flexion and use that shoulder flexion to actually drive our thoracic spine going into extension. That's also a great stretch, but can also be a great way to follow up your thoracic spine manipulation or your thoracic spine mobilization or static stretching into the next. You can take that drill and then use it to build strength through that new range of motion. Exercise number 2, that's one of my go-to squat fixes. It's going to be a toe touch squat. So I get athletes set up in what I believe their ideal squat stance is going to be, and then they're going to actually bend forward. So the knees stay straight, let their back round forward, reach down, and I'll actually have them grab their ankles with their arms slightly inside their legs, and then they're going to drop their butt down, so they're going to flex their hips and flex the knees. So they're going to settle down into the bottom of the squat. As they do that, I'm going to cue them to push their knees outside of their arms. That's going to help a lot of athletes that have a little bit of difficulty not diving into knee valgus during their squat pattern. So now they'll be in the bottom of the squat, typically with their entire spine really flexed. I'll have them let go of their heels and place their arms out in front of them. From there, I'll tell them, get your chest up high, and I'll get them to straighten their entire spine back out, and they'll be sitting in a good position in the bottom of their squat at that point. And then I'll have them stand up, and we'll repeat. So we basically get them down into a good position in the bottom of the squat, where they're balanced anterior, posterior, we've got a neutral spine, and then I have them stand up. So a lot of athletes just have a really hard time coordinating it from the top down, and when you go bottom up, it really helps them figure out where you want them to go, and after you do a couple sets of that, you ask them to squat from the top down, their squat looks completely different. Along those same lines, sometimes with athletes that I can't fix it from the top down, and something like a goblet squat, I'll implement a sit squat. This is also a great drill to use in somebody post-surgically. So maybe they're a little nervous about squatting to depth because of what they had done in their knee, or their knee's really irritated from just a general injury, and you don't want to take them through a lot of range of motion repeatedly. We're going to do this as an isometric to get them building strength down in the bottom of the squat, get them comfortable being down in the bottom of the squat. So what I'll do is I'll set up a box or a med ball at a level that's just slightly below where I want them to be squatting. So if they're a CrossFitter and I want them squatting 2 parallel, I'm going to set a box that's slightly below parallel. I have them sit on that box. I get their hips, knees, ankles positioned however I feel based on my objective assessment of their hip and ankle structure in the position that I think that they're best suited to squat from. I'll then get them while they're sitting right on the edge of that box, I'll have them lean their torso forward so that their shoulders are right over the middle of their foot, their spine is staying neutral, and basically I tell them, look, if I magically took this box out from underneath you and you were able to hold this position, this would look like a perfect bottom position of a squat for you. Now what we're going to do here is work on building strength in this position. So I want you to imagine that there's a scale underneath your butt. And you're going to push down into the ground and you're going to take 50% of your weight off of that scale. And they'll do that and I'll say, all right, did you feel some tension in your quads? Did you feel some tension in your glutes? Did you feel some tension in your ankles? And they'll say, yeah, I felt stuff everywhere. Great. Let's do that 50% again. And now I want you to raise your butt 1 inch and only 1 inch off of that box. And they'll lift up. I'll have them pause there for about 3 seconds and then they'll sit back down. And we'll repeatedly do this 50%, 1 inch lift, sit back down. And you'll find that somewhere between 5 to 10 reps, even some really high-level athletes are going to be shaken because they're not used to spending this time under tension, even with no weight here in the bottom of the squat. And it'll really help them to start owning that position. Now, what's one thing that's really important to do if you're going to use these sit squats is a lot of athletes will not be comfortable in that bottom position. And so in order to initiate their ascent, you'll actually see them rock their entire body forward. And so they'll use a little bit of momentum by throwing their head forward to get them up. And what I want them to do is direct all of their energy in a straight vertical push. So an athlete that does that forward rock, I'll actually come right in front of them. I'll put my hand an inch in front of their face. And I'll say, do that again, but don't hit your head on my face, on my hands as you raise up. Or I can put them right in front of a wall. But that's going to then give them an external cue to verticalize the forces that they're pushing down into the ground rather than using momentum to get up. Exercise number 4. In the athletes that I work with, working with a wide range from CrossFit Games athletes and national level Olympic lifters down to people that are brand new to CrossFit or Orange Theory, find a lot of athletes that have been told repeatedly over the years, don't let your knees pass your toes, sit back in your squat. And so they squat like a powerlifter. They have a vertical shin, they don't have a lot of anterior knee displacement, and a really forward torso, which is fine if you're a powerlifter, or fine if you're just trying to do squats for the most amount of weight. But if you're an Olympic lifter or performing the Olympic lifts, we need to squat with a more upright torso to put the body in a better position specific to those lifts. And so I'll find a lot of athletes that have had this sit-back cue thrown at them nonstop over and over, and then they try to go to an overhead squat. And because they're sitting back and they have this really forward torso, their shoulder gets put in a really poor position to optimally transfer force with something like an overhead squat or a snatch. And so I need to get them learning how to access their dorsiflexion in the squat. And sometimes this is a true mobility limitation that they have, but a lot of times it's just that they don't actually know how to anteriorly drive their knees when they squat. And so one of my go-to drills for that is I'll get a resistant band attached to a rig, and I'll have the athlete face a rig with that resistance band coming around their hips. So the resistance band is wanting to pull them towards the rig. And then I have them squat down, and I'll get a lot of tension on this band, and I'll have the band actually pull them forward. And it's going to kind of support them as they're driving their knees out over their toes and working on keeping an upright torso. Now, this ends up being a little bit of an exaggeration drill, because if you look at their positioning in the bottom of this, there's no way that they could actually hold it, because if the band was gone, they would actually fall on their butt. But it does a good job of saying, hey, you're squatting way out here on this side, and I want you to be way over here on this side, and doing this exaggeration drill will clean up people and get them moving back in the middle where I want them to be. Now, when they're in the bottom of that squat, a lot of times I'll have them hold 3, 5, 8, 10-pound dumbbells, and we'll do some alternating presses, just to add a little bit of movement to the equation, make them work a little bit harder in that bottom position. And that's just a fantastic drill when you're needing to work on increasing that anterior knee drive. The final squat variation that I'll talk about that's just great for improving athlete squat patterns is reactive neuromuscular training. So essentially, that is using resistant bands to pull an athlete into the direction of their movement thought. So for example, if they are going into knee valgus as they squat, if their knees are coming together, I'll put a resistance band around their knees. That resistance band will actually be pulling them further into knee valgus. And what will happen a lot of times is that external cue will fix that athlete squat pattern without you having to say anything. Or sometimes you'll have to use an external cue. And so what I'm not going to say is something like an internal cue, like, hey, I want you to activate your glute med here so that your knees don't go in, because that's not going to make sense to them, and that's not going to lead to really good motor learning. Instead, I'm going to say, hey, take that resistance band around your knees. I want you to try to stretch that resistance band as hard as you can. I want you to try to break that resistance band in half for me. And that'll result in him not going into that knee valgus near as much. There you got it. There are my 5 best squat fixes. Thanks everybody that tuned in live. Thanks for everybody that's tuned in on the podcast. Before we sign off, we've got a couple courses that I want to mention coming up. Total spine thrust manipulation. August 11th and 12th is going to be in Woodinville, Washington. That same weekend, I'll be in Seattle, Washington, just a few minutes down the road, teaching our Fitness Athlete Live certification. So a lot going on in Seattle in a couple weeks. The Total Spine Thrust is also heading to Elliott City at Recharge CrossFit on August 18th and 19th. And then on August 25th and 26th, I will be in Austin, Texas at CrossFit Austin, again doing our Fitness Athlete Live seminar. Hope you got some good ideas from that on different ways to improve the squats of the athletes and patients that come to you. As always, hit us up on Facebook or Instagram if you have questions or you have requests for future episodes. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.